Christmas morning at my family's mansion should have been magical, but as I watched them throw my carefully chosen gifts into the snow, I knew this would be different. My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and I had just spent weeks selecting the perfect presents for each family member. My mother, Catherine, screamed that I was embarrassing them with dollar store trash, while my siblings Nathan and Ashley laughed. What they didn't know was that I owned the very house they were standing in. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. You won't believe what happened when my family discovered the truth about who really owned their precious mansion. Growing up as the middle child in the Hayes family meant being invisible unless they needed someone to blame. My father, Richard, built his reputation as a successful real estate mogul, while my mother, Catherine, played the perfect socialite, hosting charity events and maintaining our family's pristine public image. My older brother, Nathan, had followed in father's footsteps, becoming a prominent lawyer at 28, while my younger sister, Ashley, had launched her own fashion design company at just 26. Then there was me, Victoria, the family disappointment who worked as a software engineer. The hierarchy in our house was crystal clear. Nathan was the golden child, destined to inherit father's business empire. Ashley was the creative princess who could do no wrong in mother's eyes. And I was the forgotten middle child who somehow never measured up to their standards. No matter what I accomplished, it was never good enough. When I graduated summa cum laude from MIT, father complained that I should have studied business instead of computer science. When I landed my first job at a tech startup, mother told her friends I was still finding myself. What hurt the most wasn't the constant criticism, it was how they systematically excluded me from family events while maintaining the facade of loving parents. Last Thanksgiving proved to be a turning point that opened my eyes to just how little I meant to them. I had cleared my schedule, bought ingredients for my grandmother's famous stuffing recipe, and even took time off work to help with preparations. The night before Thanksgiving, I called to confirm what time I should arrive, only to have Ashley casually mention that dinner had been moved to Nathan's house 3 days earlier. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you?" she said with fake concern. "We tried calling but couldn't reach you. Sorry you missed it, but we saved you some leftovers." The lie was so obvious it was insulting. They had posted dozens of photos on social media showing their perfect family gathering, complete with professional photography and matching outfits. Not a single person had attempted to contact me. When I confronted mother about it later, she claimed it was an honest mistake and accused me of being overly sensitive and looking for drama. That incident revealed something I had suspected for months. During family dinner conversations, I started noticing how Nathan would make subtle comments about my finances, suggesting to others that I was struggling and had been borrowing money from the family. These were complete fabrications. I had never asked my family for a single dollar, yet somehow Nathan had convinced extended relatives and family friends that I was some kind of financial burden. He would make comments like, "Victoria's going through a tough time right now, but we're helping her get back on her feet," or "It's hard watching your sister struggle, but family takes care of family." The truth was far more complicated. While my family lived in their expensive mansion and maintained their lavish lifestyle, I knew they were drowning in debt. Father's real estate business had been struggling for over 2 years, and mother's spending habits had only gotten worse as their income decreased. Credit card statements accidentally left on the kitchen counter told the real story. They owed nearly $300,000 across multiple accounts, and the mortgage on their beloved mansion was 6 months behind. What they didn't know was that for the past 2 years, I had been anonymously paying their most critical bills to prevent complete financial collapse. Every month, I would transfer money to cover their mortgage payments, utility bills, and minimum credit card payments. I used shell companies and anonymous payment systems to ensure they never discovered the source of their mysterious financial relief. While they celebrated their apparent ability to stay afloat despite their spending, I was literally keeping their house of cards from tumbling down. The Christmas gift incident became the final straw. I had spent weeks selecting thoughtful presents for each family member. For father, I found a vintage Rolex watch from the year he started his business. For Mother, I commissioned a custom jewelry piece featuring our family birthstones. Nathan received first edition books from his favorite author, and Ashley got high-end art supplies for her design work. These weren't cheap gifts, but they weren't outrageously expensive either. I chose them for their thoughtfulness rather than their price tags. When I arrived Christmas morning with my carefully wrapped presents, the reaction was immediate and devastating. Mother took one look at the boxes and sneered. "Victoria, really?
We've talked about this.
You can't keep showing up with these pathetic attempts at gift-giving. It's embarrassing." Before I could respond, she grabbed Nathan's present and literally threw it into the snow outside. "This is garbage. Absolute garbage. How dare you insult this family with this cheap nonsense?" Ashley joined in the cruelty, posting videos on her social media accounts showing my gifts being tossed outside while she narrated about family members who don't understand appropriate gift-giving. The humiliation was complete when Father suggested I should think carefully about whether I'm really ready to participate in family traditions if I couldn't do it properly. As I watched my thoughtful gifts disappearing into the snow, something inside me finally broke. Not with sadness, but with clarity. These people had shown me exactly who they were, and I had finally stopped making excuses for their behavior. They wanted to treat me like I was worthless? Fine. But they were about to discover that their worthless family member held more power over their lives than they could possibly imagine. The irony of my family's treatment was that while they saw me as their failure, I had actually built more wealth by 29 than any of them had ever possessed. My journey to financial success started when I was 15 and learned to code during summer break. What began as a hobby became an obsession, and by 18, I had developed my first mobile application. The app was simple, just a study scheduler for college students, but it caught the attention of a major tech company who bought it for $200,000. Instead of celebrating or telling my family about this windfall, I invested every penny into learning more about technology and markets. Throughout college, I continued developing applications and websites while studying computer science. My family assumed my part-time work was typical college jobs, waiting tables or tutoring, but I was actually building a portfolio of digital products that generated steady income streams. The real breakthrough came during my senior year when I created a data analysis tool for small businesses. The application helped restaurant owners optimize their inventory and reduce waste, something that seemed boring to most people but solved a genuine problem. Within 6 months of launching, over 5,000 businesses were paying monthly subscriptions. By graduation, I was earning more per month than Nathan made at his law firm. My cryptocurrency investments came next. While my family mocked internet money as a fad for naive millennials, I had spent months researching blockchain technology and understanding market patterns. I invested conservatively, never risking more than I could afford to lose, but my timing was excellent. When Bitcoin and Ethereum exploded in value, my modest investments became worth over $2 million. Rather than cashing out everything, I diversified into traditional stock markets, focusing on technology companies I understood. My software engineering background gave me insights into which companies were genuinely innovative versus which ones were simply riding hype waves. Tesla, Apple, Google, Amazon all became long-term holdings that multiplied my wealth year after year. By 25, I had reached my first million. By 27, I had surpassed 5 million. Now, at 29, my net worth exceeded $8 million. The strangest part was how easy it became to hide my success. My family expected so little from me that they never questioned my modest lifestyle. I rented a small apartment, drove a reliable used car, and dressed simply. To them, this confirmed their belief that I was struggling financially. They never wondered why I always paid cash for purchases, or how I could take time off work for vacations. Their preconceived notions made them blind to obvious signs of financial stability. Meanwhile, their own financial situation deteriorated rapidly. Mother's spending addiction reached new heights as she tried to maintain appearances while their income dropped. She would spend thousands on designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and luxury vacations, then complain about being financially stressed without any sense of irony. Her credit card bills showed shopping sprees that would have covered most people's annual salaries. Father's real estate business suffered from poor decisions and changing market conditions. He had invested heavily in commercial properties just before the market shifted, leaving him with expensive buildings he couldn't sell and rental income that didn't cover his loans. Rather than adapting his strategy, he continued making risky investments, hoping for one big deal that would solve all his problems. The first sign of serious trouble came when Daniel Miller approached me at a coffee shop near my office. Daniel introduced himself as Father's business partner and explained that he had a generous offer for my apartment. He claimed they were looking to buy several properties in my neighborhood for a development project and would pay 20% above market value. Something about his demeanor felt wrong immediately. His offer was too good, his timeline too urgent, and his knowledge of my living situation too detailed. After researching Daniel Miller, I discovered he wasn't actually Father's business partner at all. He was a private investigator and debt collector who specialized in asset recovery for wealthy clients. Father had hired him to investigate my financial situation and identify anything valuable they could convince me to sell. The apartment offer was really an attempt to determine how much money I might have hidden away. This discovery led me to dig deeper into my family's schemes. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Ashley had been asking friends and acquaintances about my job, my income, and my living situation, claiming she was worried about my financial instability. These conversations always included subtle hints that the family might need to intervene to help me manage money better. She was building a narrative that would justify taking control of my assets. Nathan's strategy was more direct but equally manipulative. He had started dating my ex-boyfriend Marcus, not out of genuine attraction, but to gather information about my financial habits and past relationships. Marcus, flattered by attention from a successful lawyer, eagerly shared details about my college years, my work projects, and my investment discussions. Nathan used this intelligence to craft his lies about my supposed financial dependence on the family. The most shocking discovery came when I found loan documents with forged signatures. Nathan had been using my name and personal information to take out small loans, probably testing whether he could access larger amounts of money without my knowledge. Each loan was small enough to avoid triggering major fraud investigations, but together they represented a clear pattern of identity theft. Catherine's fake medical crisis was the culmination of their desperation. She began claiming she needed expensive treatment for a rare condition, complete with fabricated doctor's appointments and pharmaceutical bills. The medical records she showed me were crude forgeries, but she presented them with such convincing emotion that I almost believed her performance. Her goal was obvious: guilt me into providing $50,000 for life-saving treatment that didn't actually exist. The $50,000 loan request from Ashley came with elaborate emotional manipulation. She claimed her fashion business was facing a temporary cash flow problem and needed quick funding to fulfill a major order. Without this money, she said, she would lose her biggest client and her entire business would collapse. She promised to repay me within 60 days and even offered to sign a promissory note, though I suspected any document she signed would later be disputed. What made their schemes particularly cruel was how they used my love for them against me. Each manipulation came wrapped in family loyalty and emotional appeals. They knew I cared about their well-being and wanted to help, so they crafted scenarios designed to trigger my protective instincts. The fact that they were willing to destroy my financial security to solve their self-created problems showed just how little they actually valued our family relationship. As I uncovered layer after layer of deception, I realized that my anonymous financial support had actually enabled their schemes. By secretly paying their bills, I had given them breathing room to focus on manipulating me rather than addressing their real problems. My kindness had been repaid with elaborate plans to rob me. That realization was the moment I decided to stop being their victim and start being their opponent. The morning after New Year, Father called an emergency family meeting in his home office. The room felt different somehow, heavy with desperation despite his attempts to project confidence. He stood behind his massive oak desk, the same one where he had closed million-dollar deals during his successful years, but now it seemed more like a barrier between him and the truth he was about to reveal. I need to share something important with all of you, he began, his voice carrying a gravity I had rarely heard. Our family is facing a significant financial challenge. The mansion is in foreclosure, and we have 60 days to come up with $1.2 million or we'll lose everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair while Ashley's face went pale. Mother sat perfectly still, her composure intact despite the bombshell. What struck me most was how carefully orchestrated this revelation felt. Father had chosen his words precisely, framing their financial crisis as a temporary challenge rather than the result of years of reckless spending and poor business decisions. He spoke about market fluctuations and economic uncertainties as if their situation was simply bad luck rather than the predictable consequence of their lifestyle choices. The meeting continued with detailed explanations of their various debts and obligations. Father had borrowed against the house multiple times over the past 3 years, each loan intended to fund his business ventures or cover mounting expenses. The mortgage payments had been missed for 8 months, and the bank was no longer willing to negotiate payment plans or extensions. Without immediate and substantial payment, foreclosure proceedings would begin within weeks. Nathan immediately began discussing legal strategies to delay the process, but his suggestions sounded more like wishful thinking than practical solutions. He talked about filing appeals, challenging bank procedures, and negotiating with creditors, but everyone in the room knew these tactics would only buy time, not solve the underlying problem. The money simply had to come from somewhere, and there weren't many options available. This was when Catherine's manipulation reached its crescendo. Over the following days, she began complaining about mysterious health symptoms that required immediate medical attention. Her performance was Academy Award worthy, complete with sudden dizzy spells, unexplained fatigue, and dramatic episodes where she would clutch her chest and struggle to breathe. Each incident coincidentally occurred when family members were present to witness her suffering. The medical bills she presented were elaborate fakes, showing consultations with specialists, expensive diagnostic tests, and experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. She claimed her condition was rare and potentially fatal without immediate intervention, and the total cost for her treatment would be exactly $50,000. The coincidence of this amount matching Ashley's business loan request should have been obvious, but Catherine's emotional manipulation made it difficult to think clearly. Ashley and Nathan staged what they called an intervention, but was really a coordinated attack on my character and financial priorities. They gathered in the family living room, armed with printed articles about family loyalty, financial responsibility, and moral obligations to help relatives in crisis. Their presentation was polished and rehearsive, clearly planned in advance rather than spontaneous concern. "Victoria, we need to talk about your selfishness," Nathan began, his lawyer training evident in how he structured his arguments. "This family has always been there for you, and now when we need your support, you're acting like money is more important than family bonds. Mom is literally dying, Dad is losing his life's work, and Ashley's dreams are crumbling, but you're worried about your bank account." Ashley's contribution was equally calculated. "I've been watching you these past few months, and you've changed. You used to care about us, but now you seem cold and distant. We're not asking for charity, Victoria. We're asking for family support, the same support we've always given you." This last statement was particularly galling since they had never provided any financial support to me, but challenging their narrative would have required revealing information I wasn't ready to share. The intervention continued for nearly 2 hours, with each family member taking turns explaining how my failure to help would destroy the family forever. They used every emotional manipulation technique in the book: guilt, shame, obligation, fear, and false urgency. They painted vivid pictures of Mother dying alone because she couldn't afford treatment, Father losing his business legacy, and Ashley's dreams being crushed by circumstances beyond her control. What made their manipulation especially insidious was how they twisted my legitimate concerns into character flaws. When I asked for detailed financial information before committing to help, they accused me of being suspicious and untrusting. When I suggested they consider less expensive solutions, they claimed I was being dismissive of their real problems. Every reasonable question or alternative suggestion was reframed as evidence of my selfishness and lack of family loyalty. During this period, I discovered that Nathan had been secretly dating Marcus for over 3 months. My ex-boyfriend was flattered by the attention from a successful lawyer and eager to share details about our relationship, my work habits, and my financial discussions during our time together. Marcus didn't realize he was being used as an intelligence source, but Nathan was gathering detailed information about my income, spending patterns, and investment strategies. The revelation about Nathan's manipulation of Marcus was particularly painful because it showed how far he was willing to go to exploit my personal life. Marcus and I had dated for nearly 2 years, and while our relationship ended amicably, we had shared intimate details about our hopes, dreams, and financial goals. Nathan was now using those private conversations to craft more effective manipulation strategies. Daniel Miller's role became clearer during this time as well. I learned that he had been hired not by Father's business partners, but by Russian investors who had loaned money to Father's real estate ventures. These were serious people who expected their investments to be repaid on schedule, and they were growing impatient with Father's excuses and delays. Daniel's job was to identify all family assets that could potentially be seized or liquidated to satisfy the debt. The apartment purchase offer was part of a comprehensive asset investigation. Daniel had researched my employment history, credit reports, and public records to develop a profile of my financial situation. The generous offer was designed to gauge my reaction and determine whether I had significant hidden wealth that might be worth pursuing more aggressively. Family dinners during this period became increasingly uncomfortable as the pressure mounted. Every conversation seemed designed to soften my resistance to their financial requests. They would reminisce about happy family memories, emphasize how much they loved and valued me, and express confidence that we could solve any problem as long as we worked together. The emotional manipulation was relentless and exhausting. Mother's health crisis performance became more elaborate with each passing day. She began carrying oxygen tanks, claiming her breathing problems were worsening. She would have episodes where family members needed to rush her to urgent care, though somehow these emergencies always resolved themselves quickly, without serious medical intervention. The medical expenses continued mounting, creating an artificial sense of urgency around her treatment funding. Ashley's business crisis followed a similar pattern of escalating urgency. She claimed her major client was threatening to cancel their order if she couldn't deliver on schedule, and the only thing preventing disaster was lack of funding for materials. She showed me contracts and invoices that looked legitimate, but were probably fabricated to support her story. The deadline for funding kept getting moved up, creating artificial pressure to make quick decisions without proper consideration. As the family's financial manipulation intensified, I realized they had moved beyond simple requests for help into elaborate schemes designed to separate me from my money. They weren't looking for temporary assistance or genuine loans. They were implementing a systematic plan to access whatever wealth they believed I possessed. The question wasn't whether to help them, but whether to expose their deception or let them continue believing their schemes were working. After weeks of relentless pressure, I decided to appear to cave to their demands while secretly documenting everything for my own protection. I called another family meeting and announced that I would provide the $50,000 Ashley needed for her business emergency, though I wanted to structure it as a proper loan with clear repayment terms. The relief and celebration that followed was immediate and telling. Mother actually cried tears of joy, thanking me repeatedly for saving the family and expressing how proud she was to have such a generous daughter. Father shook my hand formally and spoke about how this gesture proved I had finally matured into a responsible family member. Nathan patted my back and said he knew I would do the right thing when it really mattered. Ashley hugged me tightly and whispered about how this would save her entire business and our relationship. The transformation in their treatment of me was dramatic and immediate. Suddenly, I was included in every family conversation, invited to join Mother's shopping trips, and consulted on major family decisions. Ashley took me to expensive restaurants and shopping excursions, insisting on paying for everything as a gesture of gratitude. Nathan began including me in his professional networking events, introducing me to his colleagues as his brilliant sister, the tech entrepreneur. This sudden elevation in my family status felt surreal after years of being dismissed and excluded. They hung on my every word during dinner conversations, asked my opinions on everything from business strategies to interior design choices, and made elaborate plans for future family vacations that would include me as a central participant. The attention was intoxicating, and I could understand how someone desperate for family acceptance might fall completely for their performance. During one of these family dinners, I met Jennifer Walsh, who was introduced as Daniel Miller's business associate. Jennifer appeared to be a polished professional in her 30s, well-dressed and articulate, but something about her seemed different from Daniel's aggressive approach. While Daniel always felt pushy and manipulative, Jennifer had a more analytical demeanor that suggested genuine competence rather than desperate sales tactics. After the dinner, Jennifer approached me privately and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss a business opportunity. Her proposal was intriguing. She claimed to be starting a consulting firm that helped families navigate complex financial transitions, and she thought my background in technology could be valuable for developing client management systems. The offer seemed legitimate, but given recent experiences with my family's associates, I was naturally suspicious. During our coffee meeting, Jennifer revealed information that changed everything. She wasn't actually working with Daniel Miller by choice. She had been hired by the same Russian investors who were pressuring father to repay his loans. Her job was to investigate the entire family's assets and determine the most effective strategies for recovering the money owed to her clients. Jennifer had discovered Daniel's investigation into my finances and realized that my family was planning something potentially illegal. "Your family doesn't know who they're dealing with," Jennifer explained quietly. "These Russian investors don't just write off bad debts or accept payment plans. They have methods for recovering their money that your father probably doesn't understand. Daniel Miller has been hired to identify every asset your family owns, including anything that might be hidden or transferred to avoid seizure. They suspect your family has been hiding money, and they're prepared to use whatever methods necessary to find it." Jennifer's revelation about the Russian investors added a dangerous dimension to my family's financial crisis that I hadn't fully appreciated. These weren't traditional bank loans or conventional business debts. They were dealing with people who operated outside normal legal boundaries. Father's casual attitude toward repayment schedules and negotiation strategies was going to create serious problems for everyone involved. The fake apartment break-in occurred 3 days after my coffee meeting with Jennifer. I returned home from work to find my front door slightly ajar and several items moved or displaced inside. Nothing valuable was missing, but the intrusion was obvious enough to be noticed while subtle enough to seem like a random burglary attempt. When I called police to report the incident, Nathan and Ashley arrived within minutes, claiming they had been worried about my safety and had decided to check on me. Their response was suspiciously well coordinated. They immediately began expressing concern about my living alone in an unsafe neighborhood and suggested I should move back home temporarily for my own protection. They offered to help me pack essential items and arranged for a security company to install new locks and alarm systems, all while emphasizing how much safer I would be surrounded by family who cared about my well-being. The timing of their offer was clearly calculated. With Mother's supposed medical crisis requiring expensive treatment and Ashley's business emergency demanding immediate funding, having me living in the family mansion would make it much easier to apply constant pressure for additional financial assistance. They could monitor my daily activities, control my access to outside advisors, and create an environment where refusing their requests would seem cruel and unreasonable. I agreed to stay with them temporarily while maintaining my apartment lease, ostensibly for security purposes, but actually to observe their behavior more closely. Moving back into my childhood bedroom felt strange, but it provided unprecedented access to their private conversations and planning sessions. They clearly believed that having me under their roof would make me more susceptible to manipulation and more likely to provide additional funding beyond the initial $50,000. The drugging began subtly, with symptoms I initially attributed to stress and exhaustion. During family dinners, I would experience unusual drowsiness, mild confusion, and memory gaps that seemed inconsistent with normal fatigue. The effects were strongest after eating Mother's home-cooked meals, which she prepared personally rather than allowing household staff to handle kitchen duties. At first, I thought perhaps she was adding sleeping medications to help with my supposed anxiety about the break-in. Catherine's behavior during these episodes was particularly telling. She would express exaggerated concern about my health, suggesting that stress from recent events was affecting me more severely than I realized. She would encourage me to rest more, limit my work activities, and rely on the family for support during this difficult period. Her suggestions always emphasized how I shouldn't make important decisions while feeling unwell and should trust family members to help manage my responsibilities. Ashley's phone theft was brazenly executed during one of my drugged episodes. While I was struggling with the confusion and drowsiness that followed dinner, she offered to help me get ready for bed and volunteered to charge my phone overnight. The next morning, my phone was returned to me, but I later discovered that several banking applications had been accessed and my email accounts had been reviewed. She had probably photographed important financial information or installed monitoring software to track my communications. The discovery that my family was drugging me to access my personal information represented a level of betrayal that was difficult to comprehend. These weren't desperate people making poor decisions under pressure. They were implementing a systematic criminal enterprise designed to rob me of everything I owned. The fact that they were willing to compromise my health and safety to achieve their goals showed that their love for me was completely conditional on my financial utility. Nathan's forged power of attorney documents were discovered when I found drafts in his home office during my stay at the family mansion. The papers were professionally prepared and would have given him complete control over my finances, medical decisions, and legal affairs. The documents claimed that I was mentally incapacitated due to stress and anxiety, and that I had voluntarily granted him authority to manage my affairs during my recovery period. With my signature forged and witnesses who could be convinced to lie about the signing process, these documents might have been legally effective until I could prove they were fraudulent. The night I nearly collapsed from the drugging was the moment I realized how dangerous my situation had become. Mother had apparently increased the dosage, perhaps frustrated by my continued resistance to their financial requests despite weeks of manipulation. The symptoms were severe enough that I could have required emergency medical treatment, but when I asked to go to the hospital, the family insisted on handling my care privately to avoid unnecessary medical bills during their financial crisis. Jennifer Walsh's warning call came just hours before I might have lost consciousness entirely. She had been monitoring the situation and realized that my family's schemes were escalating beyond simple financial fraud into potentially life-threatening territory. Her advice was direct and urgent. I needed to leave the house immediately and seek medical attention without telling my family where I was going. The Russian investors had given Daniel Miller permission to use more aggressive methods, and my family's cooperation with those methods was putting me in genuine physical danger. The morning after my near collapse, I pretended to be feeling better while secretly planning my escape from the family mansion. Nathan had prepared transfer documents that would move $200,000 from my accounts into what he described as a family emergency fund that he would manage during the crisis. The papers were presented as a temporary measure to consolidate resources for maximum efficiency, but I recognized them as a sophisticated theft scheme designed to separate me from my wealth while maintaining legal cover. Nathan's presentation about the emergency fund was masterful in its deception. He explained that by pooling our resources, the family could negotiate better rates with creditors, qualify for bulk payment discounts, and maintain better coordination of financial strategies. He had prepared charts and financial projections showing how this approach would save money and solve problems more effectively than individual efforts. His law training was evident in how carefully he had crafted language that sounded reasonable while concealing his true intentions. The emergency fund documents included provisions that would have made it virtually impossible for me to recover my money once transferred. Nathan would have sole signatory authority, claiming this was necessary for quick decision-making during the crisis. Any withdrawal would require unanimous family consent, supposedly to prevent impulsive spending that might jeopardize the overall strategy. The fund could be dissolved only after all family debts were resolved, giving them permanent control over my contribution. During this period, I discovered that Ashley had been posing as me online to obtain additional loans and credit accounts. She had used my personal information to apply for credit cards, personal loans, and even mortgage pre-approvals, building a debt portfolio in my name that she intended to use for her own purposes. The identity theft was sophisticated, involving fake employment verification, fabricated income statements, and forged documentation that would have been difficult to detect without careful investigation. Ashley's online impersonation was particularly cruel because she was using our family relationship to make her fraud more convincing. When lenders called to verify information, she would explain that she was Victoria Hayes and that her brother Nathan, a prominent lawyer, could provide character references if needed. She used intimate family details and personal information to answer security questions and build credibility with financial institutions. The revelation of Catherine's fake illness came during what I thought would be a private conversation about her medical needs. She was alone in the kitchen, apparently unaware that I was nearby, when she took a phone call from someone discussing payment for performance services. I heard her laughing about how convincing her medical episodes had been and how easy it was to manipulate emotional people who want to help. She actually bragged about her acting skills and discussed strategies for making her fake symptoms more believable. Confronting Catherine about her deception was a mistake that revealed how dangerous my situation had become. When I accused her of faking her illness, she didn't deny it. Instead, she became angry that I had discovered her scheme. "You ungrateful little brat," she snapped. "After everything this family has done for you, you have the nerve to question our methods? We're fighting for our survival, and if you're too stupid to help willingly, then we'll take what we need." Her admission that the medical crisis was completely fabricated was shocking, but her casual attitude towards stealing from me was even more disturbing. Catherine spoke about my money as if it rightfully belonged to the family, and my resistance to their demands was portrayed as selfish betrayal rather than reasonable self-protection. She had convinced herself that my financial success somehow obligated me to solve their self-created problems. Father's attempt to have me kidnapped represented the complete breakdown of any pretense that this was still a family dispute rather than organized crime. Daniel Miller and 2 associates approached me in the parking lot outside my office, claiming they needed to discuss urgent family business in private. When I refused to go with them, Daniel became more aggressive, insisting that my family was worried about my mental state and had requested intervention for my own safety. The kidnapping attempt failed only because Jennifer Walsh had been monitoring my activities and called security when she saw unfamiliar men approaching me in the parking lot. Building security cameras recorded the entire incident, providing evidence that would later prove invaluable in criminal proceedings. Daniel and his associates retreated when they realized they were being observed and recorded, but not before making it clear that they would try again. My family's response to the failed kidnapping was to report me as missing and potentially dangerous to local police. They claimed I had been acting erratically, making threats against family members, and had disappeared from their home without explanation. Nathan used his legal credentials to make their report seem more credible, providing detailed accounts of my supposed mental health deterioration and expressing concern that I might harm myself or others. The false police report was designed to accomplish several goals simultaneously. It would discredit any accusations I might make about their criminal activities by portraying me as mentally unstable. It would provide legal justification for forcibly hospitalizing me for psychological evaluation, during which they could complete their financial schemes without interference. Most importantly, it would allow them to claim they were acting in my best interests rather than pursuing their own criminal agenda. Nathan's use of forged documents to freeze my bank accounts was the most sophisticated part of their scheme. He had prepared court documents claiming that I was mentally incapacitated and that emergency measures were needed to protect my assets during my psychological crisis. The papers included statements from family members describing my erratic behavior, medical records supposedly showing my deteriorating mental state, and financial analysis suggesting that I was making irresponsible decisions with money. The account freezing process moved quickly because Nathan had prepared everything in advance and submitted papers to a judge who knew him professionally. Without my presence to contest the claims or provide alternative evidence, the court approved temporary measures that gave Nathan conservatorship over my finances, pending a full hearing that might not occur for weeks. During this time, he would have complete access to my money and investment accounts. Ashley's appropriation of my apartment was the final insult in their comprehensive theft scheme. While my accounts were frozen and I was supposedly missing, she moved her belongings into my home and changed the locks, claiming that I had offered her the space during her business crisis. She had forged documents suggesting that I had given her permission to use the apartment, and she was prepared to argue that the arrangement was voluntary and temporary. The family celebration of their apparent victory was premature but revealing. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me and successfully gained control of my wealth through their elaborate schemes. Nathan bragged about the legal sophistication of his approach. Ashley was excited about expanding her business with stolen funding, and Catherine was already planning expensive purchases with money that didn't belong to her. Father seemed relieved that his debt problems would finally be solved, regardless of the cost to his daughter. What they failed to understand was that while they had been focused on stealing my liquid assets, they had overlooked the most valuable asset of all, the family mansion they considered their ultimate sanctuary. Their victory celebration was taking place in a house that I owned, and their assumption that I was powerless and defeated was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The real war hadn't even started yet, and they had just given me every justification I needed to destroy them completely. From a hotel room across town, I began implementing a counterattack that would expose every aspect of my family's criminal enterprise while protecting my own assets from their theft attempts. My first call was to Jennifer Walsh, who had been documenting their activities for the Russian investors but was now willing to work with me to prevent the situation from escalating into violence. Her insider knowledge of their schemes would prove invaluable in building an airtight case against them. Jennifer's first revelation was the most shocking. I actually owned the family mansion they were so desperately trying to protect. 2 years earlier, when the bank had begun foreclosure proceedings against Father's mounting debts, I had quietly purchased the property through a shell company called Cascade Holdings LLC. The family had never been informed about the ownership change. They simply continued receiving statements showing that their mortgage payments were current, unaware that those payments were coming from my anonymous contributions. The shell company structure was completely legal and had been designed to protect my investment while allowing the family to maintain their living situation without embarrassment. Cascade Holdings had purchased the property for $1.4 million during the foreclosure sale, then immediately entered into a rental agreement with my family that exactly matched their previous mortgage payments. From their perspective, nothing had changed except that their financial problems had mysteriously resolved themselves. My decision to buy the mansion had been motivated by genuine concern for their well-being rather than strategic planning. I knew they would be devastated to lose the family home, and I had the resources to prevent that outcome without causing them embarrassment or forcing them to acknowledge my financial support. The irony that they were now scheming to steal money to save a house I already owned was both tragic and absurd. Thomas Chun became my second crucial ally in the counterattack. Thomas was a tech billionaire who had purchased one of my early applications and later become a mentor and friend. When I explained my situation, he was appalled by my family's criminal behavior and eager to help expose their schemes. More importantly, Thomas had connections with law enforcement agencies and forensic accountants who could investigate financial crimes beyond local police capabilities. Thomas's first contribution was helping me regain control of my frozen bank accounts. His legal team filed emergency motions challenging Nathan's conservatorship documents, providing evidence that the forged papers were fraudulent and that I was mentally competent to manage my own affairs. Within 48 hours, a different judge had reviewed the case, realized that Nathan's initial filings were deceptive, and ordered all account restrictions removed pending a full investigation. The investigation into Nathan's forgery revealed a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond my case. Forensic analysis of the conservatorship documents showed multiple instances of falsified signatures, fabricated medical records, and perjured statements from family members. Nathan had been so confident in his legal skills that he had left an obvious paper trail proving his crimes. His law license was suspended immediately and criminal charges were filed within days. Ashley's identity theft scheme unraveled even more quickly once investigators began examining her online activities. Digital forensics experts traced her fake loan applications back to her computer and phone, revealing hundreds of fraudulent documents created using my personal information. The fake employment verifications, forged income statements, and falsified identity documents represented multiple felony charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Catherine's reaction to learning that her children faced serious criminal charges was a complete psychological breakdown. The woman who had orchestrated elaborate manipulation schemes and faked medical emergencies suddenly became genuinely hysterical when she realized the consequences of their actions. Her fake illness was replaced by real panic attacks as she faced the possibility that her golden children might go to prison for stealing from their sister. Father's response was more pragmatic, but equally desperate. When he learned that the FBI was investigating the family's financial crimes, he immediately began trying to negotiate with the Russian investors to buy time and avoid additional criminal exposure. His attempts to blame everything on Nathan and Ashley while portraying himself as a victim of his children's schemes were pathetic and ineffective. The family's house of cards collapsed with stunning speed once law enforcement agencies became involved. Daniel Miller was arrested for attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and extortion. His connections to the Russian investors led to a federal investigation that exposed money laundering operations far more extensive than my family's simple theft schemes. Nathan and Ashley's arrests followed within days, charged with identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. My family's assumptions about my powerlessness had blinded them to the reality that I had spent months documenting their criminal activities while appearing to be their victim. Every conversation had been recorded, every forged document had been photographed, and every financial transaction had been traced through legitimate channels. When authorities reviewed my evidence files, they found a comprehensive case that would have been impossible to dispute even with the most skilled legal defense. The media attention surrounding their arrests was immediate and devastating to their social standing. Local newspapers covered the story extensively, describing how a prominent family had attempted to steal millions of dollars from their own daughter through elaborate fraud schemes. The contrast between their public reputation and their criminal behavior made the story particularly compelling for journalists and social media commentators. Mother's fake medical crisis became a source of public ridicule when medical experts confirmed that her supposed rare illness didn't exist and that her dramatic episodes had been carefully choreographed performances. The revelation that she had been drugging her own daughter to facilitate financial crimes shocked even people who thought they understood family dysfunction. Her transformation from respected socialite to criminal defendant was complete and irreversible. Ashley's fashion business collapsed overnight when her clients learned about her arrest and criminal charges. Orders were canceled, contracts were terminated, and her professional reputation was destroyed beyond repair. The business she had claimed needed emergency funding to survive had actually been failing for months, and her theft schemes were desperate attempts to avoid bankruptcy rather than temporary solutions to cash flow problems. Nathan's legal career was finished before his criminal trial even began. The State Bar Association revoked his license immediately upon reviewing evidence of his forged documents and fraudulent court filings. His former law firm publicly disavowed his actions and cooperated fully with investigators to avoid being associated with his crimes. The professional reputation he had spent years building was eliminated in a matter of days. The Russian investors' reaction to learning about the family's criminal schemes was swift and decisive. They immediately demanded full repayment of their loans and began seizing every asset they could identify. Father's remaining business properties, vehicles, investments, and personal possessions were liquidated to satisfy debts that had grown substantially during the months of deception and delay. Jennifer Walsh's role in exposing the family's crimes earned her a substantial reward from the Russian investors, who were grateful to recover their money and avoid the legal complications that would have resulted from more aggressive collection methods. Her decision to work with me rather than participate in Daniel Miller's criminal schemes had been both morally correct and financially beneficial. As I watched my family's empire crumble through news reports and legal proceedings, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. They had brought these consequences on themselves through their criminal choices, but seeing them face the destruction of everything they valued was still emotionally difficult. The people who had raised me were now facing prison sentences, financial ruin, and social disgrace because they had chosen greed over family loyalty. The morning my family discovered I owned their mansion began with a phone call that shattered their remaining delusions of control. The foreclosure attorney handling the Russian investors' asset seizure had contacted them directly to explain that the family home could not be liquidated to satisfy father's debts because it was owned by Cascade Holdings LLC, not Richard Hayes. When they demanded to know who owned Cascade Holdings, the attorney politely explained that this information would be revealed during the upcoming legal proceedings. Catherine's immediate response was to call me, screaming accusations and demands for explanations. "How dare you humiliate this family like this?" she shrieked into the phone. "We raised you, we fed you, we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By stealing our home and destroying our lives?" Her inability to understand that buying their house had actually saved them from homelessness 2 years earlier showed how completely she had lost touch with reality. Nathan and Ashley's reactions were more calculated, but equally desperate. Even from jail, Nathan attempted to challenge my ownership of the mansion through legal maneuvers, claiming that my purchase had been fraudulent because I had used information gained through my family relationship to advantage myself in the foreclosure sale. His arguments were legally absurd, but they demonstrated his continued belief that he could manipulate the system to escape consequences for his crimes. Ashley tried a different approach, claiming that my ownership of the family home proved I had been plotting against them for years and that her theft schemes were actually justified self-defense against my manipulation. She told anyone who would listen that I was a sociopathic mastermind who had destroyed the family through elaborate long-term planning, conveniently ignoring the fact that her criminal activities were well documented and completely voluntary. Catherine's suicide manipulation attempt was her most desperate and manipulative performance yet. She overdosed on sleeping pills in what was clearly intended to be discovered before any serious harm occurred, then claimed that learning about my ownership of the house had driven her to despair and thoughts of self-destruction. Her goal was obviously to guilt me into dropping charges and providing financial support, but her timing was so convenient that even family friends recognized the manipulation. The suicide attempt backfired spectacularly when medical evaluations revealed that Catherine had been faking symptoms for months and that her supposed mental health crisis was largely performance art. Psychiatric professionals were not impressed by her dramatic claims of victimization, especially after reviewing evidence of her systematic drugging of her own daughter and elaborate fraud schemes. Nathan's blackmail attempt using fake compromising photos represented a new low in his criminal behavior. From jail, he had somehow arranged for fabricated images to be created and distributed, attempting to coerce me into dropping charges by threatening my reputation. The photos were obviously fake, but Nathan apparently believed that the mere existence of such materials would be sufficient to force my cooperation. The blackmail scheme collapsed when digital forensics experts easily proved that the images had been artificially created and that Nathan had paid for their production using commissary funds from his jail account. Rather than helping his case, the blackmail attempt added additional criminal charges and demonstrated his continued willingness to commit crimes even while facing existing felony charges. Ashley and Daniel Miller's kidnapping conspiracy was their most dangerous and desperate scheme. After being released on bail pending trial, Ashley had contacted Daniel and proposed a plan to kidnap me for ransom, believing that my obvious wealth would make me a lucrative target. They planned to demand several $1,000,000 for my release, money they would use to flee the country and avoid their legal problems. Their kidnapping plan was sophisticated enough to be genuinely dangerous. They had identified locations where I could be grabbed without witnesses, researched methods for restraining and transporting victims, and established hideout locations where they could hold me during ransom negotiations. The fact that Ashley was willing to participate in kidnapping her own sister showed how completely she had abandoned any pretense of family loyalty. The kidnapping attempt failed due to extensive surveillance that law enforcement had established around my activities. FBI agents had been monitoring both Ashley and Daniel since their release on bail, knowing that desperate criminals often escalate to more serious crimes when facing lengthy prison sentences. When they moved to implement their plan, agents were waiting to arrest them in the act. The failed kidnapping attempt was the final straw for my family's legal situation. Ashley's bail was revoked immediately, and she was held without possibility of release pending trial. Additional charges were filed for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and violation of bail conditions. Her maximum potential sentence increased from 5 years to 25 years, effectively guaranteeing that she would spend most of her adult life in prison. Nathan's involvement in the kidnapping conspiracy, even from jail, added conspiracy charges to his existing fraud and forgery offenses. His attempts to coordinate criminal activities while incarcerated demonstrated a complete lack of remorse and continued danger to public safety. The judge handling his case was not sympathetic to arguments about family dysfunction or financial desperation. Father's betrayal of me to the Russian investors was perhaps the most hurtful aspect of the entire ordeal. When faced with the choice between protecting his daughter and saving himself from debt consequences, he chose to offer me as collateral for his obligations. He contacted the investors directly and suggested that kidnapping me for ransom might be more profitable than continuing to pursue his limited assets. Richard's proposal to the Russian investors included detailed information about my wealth, my daily routines, and my apparent emotional vulnerabilities that could be exploited during a kidnapping scenario. He estimated that I would be worth at least $5 million in ransom payments and offered to provide inside information to help ensure a successful operation. The fact that he was willing to sacrifice his daughter's safety for his own financial benefit showed the complete moral bankruptcy of his character. The Russian investors' reaction to father's proposal was swift and decisive. They wanted their money, not criminal complications that would attract law enforcement attention to their operations. Rather than participating in kidnapping schemes, they simply accelerated their asset seizure efforts and informed authorities about Richard's attempts to involve them in violent crimes. Richard suffered a genuine heart attack when FBI agents arrived to arrest him for conspiracy and attempted human trafficking. The stress of facing federal criminal charges, combined with his deteriorating financial situation and complete social disgrace, overwhelmed his cardiovascular system. While his medical emergency was real, unlike Catherine's fake illnesses, it generated no sympathy from family members or community supporters. Catherine's decision to blame me for Richard's heart attack was the culmination of her refusal to accept responsibility for their family's criminal choices. According to her narrative, I was a vindictive daughter who had destroyed her innocent parents through false accusations and malicious prosecutions. She claimed that Richard's heart attack proved how much damage my lies had caused to the family. The heart attack occurred in the family mansion that Catherine still didn't understand belonged to me. Paramedics treating Richard were confused by her references to our house and her demands that I be banned from the property. When they asked who owned the home, Catherine's responses were so contradictory and emotional that emergency responders worried she might also be suffering from medical or psychiatric crisis. As my family's criminal empire completely collapsed, I realized that their downfall had exceeded even my expectations for justice. They were facing decades in prison, complete financial ruin, and social disgrace that would follow them for the rest of their lives. While I had wanted them to face consequences for their crimes, the totality of their destruction was sobering and final. The irony was that if they had simply been honest about their financial problems and asked for my help directly, I probably would have provided significant assistance without expecting repayment. Their decision to pursue criminal schemes rather than honest communication had transformed a family financial crisis into a federal criminal case that destroyed everything they claimed to be protecting.